Okay, so now that we know about how prices are formed in perfect competition and in a monopoly, there is a third market form, which is really important because it's probably the closest to reality, which is called monopolistic competition. So, what are the characteristics of a monopolistically competitive market? So the most important characteristic is that we have product differentiation. So we have to think maybe about a market for cars, but within the market of cars, we have like different brands and they appeal to different lifestyles. We also have free market entry, an exit, and but the characteristic of product differentiation, of course, now relaxes the assumption of dealing with homogeneous goods as we do in perfectly competitive markets. So in a monopolistic competitive market, we have essentially a segmented market, and producers have some market power over their segments simply because of the branding of the various products that different consumers feel attracted to. Again, examples for monopolistically competitive markets are automobiles, breakfast cereals, fast food chains, or hair shampoo. Well, hair shampoo, it's basically all shampoo, but one has aloe, the other one has coconut, and the other one has honey. The same with cars. Some appeal more to the sporty driver, other more to like the urban, suburban family, and the other more to the nature-loving person. The same with breakfast cereals. There's a lot of product differentiation. The one is crunchy, the other one is chocolatey, the other one is raisiny, the other one is with bran, without bran. Yeah. So I think you get the idea, and what I'm trying to derive is basically this market form here, or this equilibrium, but I want to do it step by step. So assume we have a market, and the market is like the market for cars. So we have a market for cars, and let's assume that the inverse demand function for cars. So we have the market for cars. Market for cars, inverse demand function. And let's say, so that the inverse demand function for cars is 14 minus Q. But in order to understand monopolistic competition, we have to think of that market evolving over time. So let's say the first in the market, let's say, was Ford. I don't know if that's the case, but let's say Ford was the first one in that market. So now if Ford is the only one in that market, of course, Ford is acting like a monopolist and enjoys the entire demand function for cars. So that would be the demand function, goes from 14 to 14. And let's maybe give it a different color. And then if Ford is acting like a monopolist because it's the only one producing cars, then Ford looks at their marginal revenue function. Let's make that. And now Ford will look where is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that is here, and then Ford will charge a price of 2 and supply 4, and again charge a price of 10. So basically this is just like a monopoly. But now, as opposed to a monopoly in monopolistic competition, we have now market entry. Well, why do we have market entry? Because Ford is facing still, or there's a demand where people's willingness to pay is still greater than the cost of producing them. So that attracts market entry, and nothing keeps people from entering a monopolistically competitive market. So now what happens is that a second market establishes itself, maybe, let's give it a dark green or so. And this demand function consists of whatever Ford does not serve. So this is the demand function, which is not being served by Ford, and that becomes now a second market. So we just shift this residual demand function into a new market, and let's say this new, maybe the second company, I don't know if it's historically true, but let's say this is Chevrolet. So that is now the second. So now Chevrolet brands their car differently and makes it maybe more sporty or gives it a different image, and that creates another market segment in which Chevrolet has market power over those who just appreciate that differentiated product. So also Chevrolet is looking at their marginal revenue function and then behaves again like a monopolist. So here we have marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and now Chevrolet will charge a price of 7, and this is now the residual demand function also for Ford, because at the new price of 7, well, Ford also needs to lower its price, and the residual demand function that is faced by Chevrolet, and with the competition between the two markets, and because all the firms are the same, so now Ford is basically just looking like Chevrolet too. So what happens is whenever there's market entry, the prices go down, but then because all the firms are more or less the same and they need to charge the same price, that also affects the residual demand function, so that we can assume that what Chevrolet looks like now is also what Ford looks now. So the price also goes down for Ford, and also some people who used to buy Ford, they are now switching over to Chevrolet. So this residual demand, marginal revenue scenario, that is now identical for Chevrolet and Ford. But anyhow, and of course they all have the same technology, so the marginal cost is the same and average total cost is the same. So in this case, each firm is now only producing 3, and the price that everyone can charge is 7. Okay, so you can already see that market entry hurts Ford, because some people who used to like Ford, they maybe like now Chevrolet more, and they switch over, and so both have to charge the same price. But even now, after a second entrant, there's still some demand left for cars in general, where people's willingness to pay is higher than the cost of serving them, so that opens up space for another entrant. So there's another residual demand function, which starts now here, and let's give it a different color, maybe down. And this residual demand is now opening up an opportunity for a third entrant. And so now maybe that third entrant is, I don't know, historically maybe GM. And GM is giving their cars again a different branding. So maybe Ford is more family oriented, Chevrolet more sporty, and GM more country loving. So also in this segment, GM is now taking a look at its marginal revenue function. And this value here, that would be 3.5. Okay. So that is the marginal revenue function. And Chevrolet will now act again like, let's find another color here. That brown one, maybe this one. So we'll choose a quantity of 2 and charge a price of 5. But again, so now the residual demand function that GM has becomes also the residual demand function essentially for everyone else, because some people that used to buy Chevrolet and Ford, well, they become now also customers of GM, which reduces demand in each of the other markets. So this GM equilibrium is what all the firms face now. So GM and everyone else now supplies only 2, and the price is 5. And that means the price that also Ford and Chevrolet has to charge. So everyone produces only 2. Okay, but now in that equilibrium we can see, so this scenario here first shows that in the equilibrium we still have allocation inefficiency because the price is still higher than marginal cost. So even in this scenario, there is this little deadweight loss, which is this area here. So in the equilibrium of a monopolistically competitive firm, or in the equilibrium of monopolistic competition, we also have allocation inefficiency. So we have allocation inefficiency because all firms, because this is what not only GM looks like, but because of all the movements between the different buyers, maybe we have now, this is the situation for GM, but also Chevrolet and Ford. So all firms look the same in the equilibrium, but you can see that the price of 5 is greater than the marginal cost of what looks here like 3. So we have a deadweight loss. So we have allocation inefficiency. But you can also see that all firms, they operate inefficiently in terms of production, because the minimum of average total cost would be actually here. So we also have production inefficiency. Production inefficiency. Because the actual quantity produced, so Q actual, is less than the quantity at ATC min. So that means we actually have overcapacity. I think we could lower the price if each company could produce too much, could produce more. That is why some people say in monopolistic competition, we actually have too much competition. There is too much competition. There is too much competition. Or you can say we have too much product differentiation. And sometimes when you walk through a supermarket and you see all the different kinds of brands for cereal, you know, sometimes you wonder, or maybe there's a little bit too much product differentiation. And like cereal, it's actually pretty expensive. So you can think, you know, if there were less selection, maybe the price for each pack of cereal would be less. But then, of course, who are we to tell what people want? I mean, if people like the product differentiation and buy it, if it passes the selection test of the market, well, we just have to live with it. But the fact of the matter is that in a monopolistically competitive long-run equilibrium, which is this third graph here, we have allocation inefficiency, the price is above marginal cost, and the firms operate to the left of ATC. And if you remember, when we looked at the short-run equilibrium of perfect competition, in the short run, we also had production inefficiency, so this was the short run. But in the short run, if this is the price, then because the market booms so much, we produce to the right of ATC min. But in monopolistic competition, we end up with an equilibrium where all the firms produce to the left of the quantity where average total cost would be minimum. So therefore we can say in the short run equilibrium of perfect competition, the market overheats, the firms produce a lot, but in a monopolistically competitive market, there is actually not really overheating. There is a lot of competition, but everyone produces not at the optimum capacity. So you can think of that the machines, they don't run as efficiently as as they should, at least from a production efficiency perspective. So in other words, if you think of monopolistic competition, you can think of it this way. In order to identify the equilibrium, you take the market demand for cars. But that market demand is becoming ever more split up into segments until there is a residual demand function which forms a point of tangency with the average total cost function. And that is the equilibrium, because now the firms, they get the price of 5 and that is equal to the average total cost. So that means this is also a zero economic profit equilibrium. There are no supernormal profits, which is just like in perfect competition. And again, so this would be here. So again, the market becomes sliced up until there is a residual demand function which forms a point of tangency with the average total cost function. And then even though the firm still acts like a monopolist, the resulting price is equal to average total cost. So it is a zero economic profit equilibrium, just like in perfect competition. But because there is market entry, and people have market power over their segments, they still can behave a little bit like a monopoly too, and there is allocation efficiency. So you can see there is like elements of both perfect competition. This element is zero economic profit, but you can also see elements of a monopoly, which is price is above marginal cost. Okay, so this is basically just what you can see here. So initially we have only one firm, and they come up with, let's say, a fancy product like the first Ford card, and they act like a monopolist. And then we had here a price of 10 and a quantity of 4. So then those supernormal profits that occur here attracts market entry of a second firm that differentiates the product. And now the price for both firms drops to 7. But both firms still make supernormal profits. And then we have again another residual demand function. And we displayed in the third graph. And now you can see the residual demand function is a point of tangency with the average total cost. And then if we let that third entrant behave like a monopolist, we can see that the monopoly price overlaps with the average total cost function. So it's a zero economic profit, but we still have a price which is above marginal cost, meaning we still have this little triangle as a deadweight loss. So in this case, we have 3 firms, each supplying 2. And so the total quantity supplied is 3 times 2, which is 6. But because the firms only charge a price of 5, and normally at the price of 5, total quantity demanded would be 9, as you can see here, but we produce only 6. So there is therefore a deadweight loss. And we will do later some examples where we calculate that in more detail. But at this point, let's compare again what we have learned about the different market forms with respect to allocation efficiency and production efficiency. So when it comes to perfect competition, we always have allocation efficiency because the price is always equal to marginal cost. But in the short run, we do not have production efficiency. So in the short run, which looks like this, a typical firm will have a supernormal profit, and that supernormal profit is somewhat associated with letting the machine runs maybe at higher RPM than what is the optimum, but because they make so much profit, there is production that is not efficient in terms of least average total cost. So, but in the long run, that changes, because in the long run, in perfect competition, all the firms operate at the minimum of average total cost. So therefore, in the long run, it can get better than perfect competition because all the efficiency criteria, they are met: allocation efficiency and production efficiency. Well, in the monopoly, we have seen that there is no difference between the short run and the long run, and the price is always above marginal cost. So a monopolist will always charge a price which is above marginal cost, and that prevents some consumers to be served at the cost which is actually lower than those consumers' willingness to pay, and that creates a deadweight loss. And there's no difference between the short run and the long run. So we never have allocation efficiency. When it comes to production efficiency, well, could be. Again, in a monopoly, just very quickly, if we draw it, we have the demand function, we have the marginal revenue function, we may have a marginal cost function. Well, it could be that the average total cost is right here in the quantity that the monopolist chooses, but it could also be there, so we don't know. So, but when it comes to monopolistic competition, what we know is we never have allocation efficiency. The price is always above marginal cost. And in the short run, just like in a monopoly, maybe we have production efficiency, could be, because in the short run it's just like a monopoly. But what we know is that in the long run we definitely do not have production efficiency, and we produce at the quantity where we do not reach the minimum of average total cost, as opposed to the perfectly competitive firm in the short run. They produce at the quantity which causes higher social costs than what the optimum is, but that comes from too much production. In the case of monopolistic competition, it is less than optimal production. In the case of perfect competitions, it's more than optimal production, where the higher costs result from. So these are the three main markets, and we have seen how those markets generate different prices and what those welfare implications are. So we looked at perfect competition, monopoly, and monopolistic competition. And let's review this a little bit more by looking at some problem sets related to that.